Hello everyone, in my Artemis II cinematic, I did sort of gloss over the actual translunar injection burn, which is conducted by the service module in here, rather than the ICPS stage, which is in here. I did it all with the ICPS stage, and I sort of knew that they were going to use the service module to complete it, but I didn't really understand why. So I've thought about it a little bit more since the actual events have occurred, and I'll give you what I think is the reasoning, but I might be wrong, and if you guys know better because they had mentioned it at some point, please tell me. But the fact of the matter is that, especially since the SLS core stage boosts them up, the ICPS can certainly just send Orion over to the moon. That's not a problem. So why do they do it with the service module? Well, there are a few reasons, and I'll get to that once we get to orbit. But first, I wanted to talk about how the launch window is set up. Since we are using the SLS core stage to boost us up, the mission can't just launch any day. Otherwise, the launch site at Cape Canaveral is just fine for going to the moon on any given day. So we need to be in the same inclination as the moon, and from Cape Canaveral that occurs once a day. So there's only one time per day that you can launch. However, the reason why there's a certain time of the month that they can launch, and then they have to wait until the next month, is because if we're trying to boost, and so this is the right time of the day, okay? But if the moon was in some other location, like over here, then when we boost up with the SLS core stage, our apoapsis is still got to be on this side because it has to keep burning. It can't shut down and restart. So it's going to end up having an orbit that's in this direction, and if the moon is over here, that's the wrong direction. And so the only time of the month that you can go in the way that they're doing is when the moon is sort of around this location. So this week over here, when the moon's around here, then they can go. And was that true of Apollo? No, that's because Apollo was starting out in a low orbit first and not getting this initial boost with its core stage. Well, it didn't really have a core stage. It had 3 stages, and the third one was able to restart, is the key. So now the ICPS can restart, the little one in here, but the core stage, the big one, can't. And that is what they're using to give a little bit of a boost. Does the whole system technically need a boost? No. If you use the ICPS plus most of the fuel in the service module, you can do it, but they decided that they wanted to make the most use out of the core stage as possible, and that's probably good for many reasons, like decoupling, because you want to expend as much fuel as possible. The pyrotechnics might have to push more away, right? I mean, if you leave it heavy, then the pyrotechnics might not like that. So anyway, there's all sorts of reasons like that. But allow me to launch first, and then we'll discuss things further. So I'm launching on May 14th instead of the actual date because in this save, this is the one where I did the cinematic, and so I already used the April 1st launch date, and also because of the peculiarities of real solar system starting in 1950, the whole thing, the moon's location is off by about 2 weeks. So that's why we're launching now. It ultimately ends up being the same thing as it was on April 1st. This is basically the situation. These are just fixed Kerbal constructs things. I used modular launch pads parts. The tower is supposed to be not red, but I decided to use the tower from Saturn V because it's actually fixed to pad 39B right now, and I might want to do stuff with Saturn V, right? Off we go. The view down the line. Okay, getting ready for booster sub. Off they go. A little bit awkward. So I'm using KOS, and that is primarily because that way I can just write in the timings for everything. Off goes the launch escape system. And you might have noticed that I omitted the service module fairing jettison, and you just saw why in the cinematic video. I might need to up the release force on those. Alright, now we're boosting beyond just orbit, but the periapsis is going to be kept negative on account of the fact that we want to dispose of the SLS core stage. So that's that. It releases. A little bit awkwardly, I should put more separatrons on. But yes, so the SLS core stage ends up on the negative periapsis, and we have the positive high apoapsis, which means that this is currently suborbital. I'll get the solar panels out lest we have some faux pas with that. Alright. So, the orbit ends up looking like this. And it's a little bit askew. The apoapsis is a little bit off from the descending node, and that's because of where we are in the window too. So if we're at the beginning of the window, it'll be on one side, and if we're at the end of the window being the monthly window. So for the whole week that we have, there's the start of the week and then the end of the week. So there's going to be a variance in where our apoapsis ends up like that. But the first burn we do then is, of course, to lift our orbit up so that we're not re-entering as well. But if the ICPS were to fail, so if this stage here was to not ignite, currently they're on a trajectory that they can re-enter with. And that's sort of the point. The purpose, I think, of the service module burn to complete translunar injection is, one, to test the service module, but also, two, so that when they, ahead of going to the moon, they do a burn with the service module so that they know it's working. And also, they use a lot of the propellant from the service module so that it's light for when they decouple. So it's sort of the same idea as with the core stage. You expend most of the fuel in the core stage so that when it's separated, it can separate cleanly, and the pyrotechnics don't have to deal with some really heavy stage. And so it's the same way all the way through as far as that and the need to test everything. So let me just get this extended. So we've got that. And we'll do this minor burn, which they did, to lift the orbit up. So the mod I used for the Orion and SLS is Artemis Construction Kit. But you can see the ICPS has 3,300 meters per second. That alone is already enough to transfer Orion with its service module to the moon. So why are we doing this? Well, once again, because we're going to be testing the service module. That's why we're using it to complete the burn. And we're going to want it to be a little bit lighter. But there's also a matter of the trajectories that we end up on. So first of all, we saw that the core stage left us on a trajectory where we would be re-entering, and they would be able to come back even if neither the ICPS nor the service module stage worked. So that is, I suppose, considered a positive. Though I have to point out that the service module in particular is very, very reliable in terms of its engine. The engine is the AJ10-190, which was the shuttle OMS engine, which did lots of restarts and was very, 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 very consistent. Like its failure rate is, I don't know if it ever failed, and it did thousands of ignitions. So I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what the panic is, but it's practically the most reliable engine on the planet. So I mean, rocket engine. Settling the fuel down on this stage takes a while. These thrusters are very weak. But anyway. A little shot with the core stage. At one point I fixed the plume during the recording of the video, but I didn't edit the configurations to fix this plume yet. Oops. I went to... Oh no, I was supposed to do that. I don't know why the node... Oh, I guess we could pass the node, so... Well, good thing this has more ignitions. I think they said there was like 100 and something nautical miles. That's about that. Of course, they gave all the numbers in either statute miles or nautical miles, depending on how they were feeling at the moment. And so we have to translate that into kilometers around here. Alright, so then we end up in this orbit. One notes that we are a little bit off because we're at the at one end of the window. We are going to be a little bit off, and that's going to come into play. So we have to do a burn to lift our orbit using the ICPS, the current stage. And that burn is not going to be this high, actually. It's only going to use, about that much. But it wants the ICPS to re-enter. So we also have to do a radial burn. So that's like, well, it has to be behind us. Now, probably looking at this right now, because I just thought about it, but I hadn't really done it, we should probably have launched a little bit later, so that when we did this boost up, this apoapsis was more on this side. So I would probably, that would be adjusting the date. Remember, I concluded that we were a little bit off, so maybe having the moon a little bit earlier would be good, and so we should have launched maybe the window in real solar system, given that the moon's in the wrong location anyway, should have been a few days earlier. So, okay. Okay, well, I'm just gonna let it go. But what you might be noticing is that for each of the decisions, there were a number of different considerations. It's not just one reason for just using the ICPS for this amount. There's the matter of testing the service module, there's the matter of how things are decoupled, there's the matter of making sure the ICPS is disposed of, and so we get a whole list of different considerations that go into this orbit. Now, the one downside to this whole business is that they're sure spending a lot of time in the radiation belts like this. They're passing through a number of times, so the Apollo missions would go out and they'd come back, so that's 2 passes, and pretty quick. This time they're going 1, 2, that was the first one with the SLS core stage bit, 3, 4, 5 out to the moon, and then 6 coming back, so 6 passes. Which makes me feel a little bit better about some of the things I do with space planes, because with the space planes coming back from the moon, you can aerobrake around Earth, but that takes a few passes as well. So for like the Aska space plane, or one of those space planes that actually goes out to the moon, I feel a little bit better about doing the aerobraking rather than doing a propulsive drop of our orbit. So the Shinkansen space plane as well. I was very hesitant to do so many passes, but if NASA's alright with it, then that's fine by me, you know. And maybe to some extent they're testing that out, where they can shield the capsule properly for making these multiple passes through the radiation belts. The Orion capsule is much more shielded than the Apollo command module was. You can see that over the surface of it, and if we take a look here, it's literally tiled over the whole thing. Now you can see we're quite radial from prograde, and that's part of the thing that's happening with this stage. That's intentional. So it's basically wasting the fuel of this in order to make sure that this gets disposed of primarily. Try to get it where I want it to be. Oh, okay. That's good enough. Doing maneuvers during phys warp is probably a bad idea. But okay, that's a good disposal situation for the ICPS. And let me just knock it off there before it annoys us further. And a decent apoapsis, though I don't think quite as high as they did. They got it to higher than this. I'm once again mixing up the miles and kilometers. And I'm pretty sure they got it to 40-something thousand miles, not 40-something thousand kilometers. But that's okay. So the net result is that Orion now is on a suborbital trajectory, and if the service module didn't start for some reason, it would be able to do the rest. Now, I've got the timing a little bit off, as I mentioned, because this is the first time I'm trying this. Again, I thought of all this stuff and wanted to present it, but I hadn't practiced it. Yeah, I needed to make all this happen a few days ahead of time. So right now I'm not getting set up for the free return trajectory or anything like that. What's happening is, well, that's the 5 days, but we're not getting exactly synced up with the moon here. So ultimately the problem was caused by the fact that I have to figure out exactly how much to adjust for the fact that the moon is not in the right place in real solar system here. And that would not be a problem with the Principia mod that does track the planets properly. And the reason why we ended up sort of askew is because of the disposal orbit of the ICPS being a partly radial burn, which tilted our orbit towards the moon, whereas actually I wanted to go away from the moon. But if it wasn't that case, then our periapsis would be in front of us, and then Orion would get disposed of along with the ICPS. So we needed to do the burn where it's tilting like this towards the moon, and that means that we really need the moon further back than it is right now. So that was different from the cinematic, where I didn't do that burn like that. I did a direct translunar injection burn with the ICPS. And so I have learned something. Alright, that should be about right there. Could we fix this at this point? I don't think so. We're really close to the moon now. And so yeah, I think I would have to start from launch and plan a few days. We should have more days ahead of time. So maybe May 10th would have been good. But I've learned something, and hopefully I have given people some understanding of the considerations that potentially went into deciding this arrangement. So there's a whole lot of things going on, and probably considerations that I haven't thought of that NASA could inform us about if they thought we would be interested. For now, I'll have to leave it here without getting the free return trajectory, which is a whole other discussion, but I think that's been a little bit more covered than these peculiarities with how the 3 stages are used, the core stage, the ICPS, and the service module, in order to amount to a transfer to the moon. If I had done this correctly, we would have a transfer to the moon more or less with about 600 meters per second, a little bit less than 600 meters per second. But again, the moon has to be further back. So, and the reason why I didn't get that is because of the radial burn to dispose of the ICPS. So anyway, for now, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.